All right, so today we did our third practice exam, and if you participated in the exam, this is a debrief video reminding you of what we talked about and showing you my sample essay. If you didn't participate in the exam, that's okay. You still might find something helpful in this video. You can also stop the video, go to Google Classroom, do the practice exam really quick, time yourself 45 minutes, and then come back and watch. Here are the documents, but again, they're listed in Google Classroom as well. Okay, so how should you brainstorm and annotate? We've talked about this a lot, but I just want to remind you that you cannot annotate on the documents digitally, like in the exam window. It's not going to let you do that. So you either need to print them or have a blank sheet of paper. So this is what my brainstorming looked like today. I just, on a blank sheet of paper, numbered 1 through 5, and then I did my grouping, plain and simple. For this particular DBQ, I felt like the grouping was kind of easy because the prompt actually said social and economic. And so if you wanted to, you could just use those. So for example, and we talked about this immediately after the exam for those of you that participated, we just talked about all the different ways that you might be able to group them. So you could group them like I did, or like you're going to see me do in this sample essay. You could have gone really simple and just done 2 groups, social and economic, like you see right here. You could have done all economic. Technically speaking, the way that it's prompt, if you wanted to say that it was nothing but economic, you could do that. Or if you wanted a more balanced alternative, you could even argue it like this. So 3 different possible groupings right here on this slide, and mine makes number 4. But this is my favorite thing about DBQ. There's not a single right answer. The most important thing that you have to remember is just make sure that your groups are based on evidence. If your groups are based on evidence from the documents and they are addressing the prompt you've been given, you're good to go. All right, so again, if you wanted to, you could stop right now and try and grade my essay to kind of see like how well do you understand the rubric, because this link will take you to my sample essay ungraded. There's no color coding. You could decide where you think each part of the rubric is. So if you want to do that, pause the video, find the sample essay, and go ahead and grade it yourself. And then you can come back and watch and see how you did. All right, and this is just my typical disclaimer. If you've watched these videos, you heard me say it before, but it's always worth repeating that, keep in mind, I'm an adult and I have a degree in history, and I didn't write like this when I was a sophomore in high school. No way, no how. I didn't even take AP history because my school didn't offer it. So I probably didn't even write like this as a college freshman. I definitely didn't write like that as a college freshman. I don't expect you guys to write exactly like me. I don't want you to feel like in order to pass the AP test, you have to write an essay like I'm going to show you. I'm just trying to write a sample that shows you all the points included. Most students don't have time to include all the points. They just don't. But that's okay because you don't need to include all the points in order to get a passing score on the AP exam. Okay? So just keep in mind, I want you to put your own flair on your essays. Write like you, a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old, however old you are. Okay? No one expects you to be writing like a 35-year-old teacher. Okay. This is just to remind you of the colors we're using for highlighting. And again, this is based on the new 2020 rubric. As far as I know, this is the only year we're using this rubric. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball to look into the future, but you can click here. If you go to the slides in order to see the modified rubric, it's also posted in Google Classroom. Okay, pause for a second and read through. Okay, so just a couple of quick things about the contextualization. Mine is 4 sentences long. One of the most important things that I want you guys to remember is the idea of a bridge or transition sentence. So this last sentence of contextualization that says the Spanish discovery of silver in the Americas led to a new global flow of silver, which had lasting worldwide impact. That is linking my contextualization up here, linking it to the thesis, linking it to the topic of the prompt. That's me narrowing things down. So I will say that if you're going to miss contextualization, it's probably because you forget to do that transition. It's going to be especially tempting because of the nature of this year's exam to maybe like have a prepared contextualization ready to go. But if you do that, you risk not having that transition sentence. You risk having like this really like well-written but random contextualization that doesn't connect to the prompt. And if it doesn't connect to the prompt, you're not going to earn the point. Okay, let's take a look at the thesis statement. The global flow of silver had great economic impacts, such as the hoarding of silver by some countries and the potential to profit by others. One major social impact can be seen in the development of new social hierarchies in the Americas. So I just want to remind you guys that if you just said the global flow of silver had great economic impacts as well as social impacts, you would not get the thesis point. That's way too vague. Always remember that you need to be adding in almost like a hint as to what your paragraphs are going to be about, right? I know that my first paragraph is going to be about how some countries were hoarding silver, just from looking at my thesis statement. And then I know that my second paragraph is going to be about the potential to profit by other countries. And then my third paragraph is going to be about this social issue. Okay, so remember when you evaluate your thesis statement the day of the test, make sure you ask yourself, like, is this clear enough? Can the reader guess what my paragraphs are going to be about? Because it should be really clear, and they should definitely be able to tell you before they even read the paragraphs what each paragraph will be about. All right, here is body paragraph 1. If you have not yet read body paragraph 1, pause it and go ahead and read through. All right, this was my relatively simple paragraph. I did use 3 documents, but it ended up being my simple paragraph. And that's just because I didn't really feel like situating any of these documents. I didn't think they were good candidates, or I didn't think of anything during my 45-minute time limit. So, but it does help me earn points, right? I've gotten my first 2 yellows where I'm just basically addressing the topic of the prompt. So I'm on my way to earning greens. And anyway, this is just a pretty straightforward paragraph. There's nothing special in here. The only points I'm earning are I'm counting up towards those evidence points. You can earn 3 different points for evidence, showing off that you understand the documents and you know how to pull evidence from them. Okay, I maybe could have highlighted this in green, maybe. I didn't, just because I felt like that was a pretty simple sentence, but I know I used all 5 documents, so I was good either way. One thing that, this is mainly for those of you who are going to type your essay. If you're going to type, one thing that I really like about the ability to type your essay is that you don't have to write your essay in chronological order. You can go through and set up your paragraphs by just simply paraphrasing every document and putting them in the paragraphs you want them to go into. And then you can go back and figure out, okay, here's where I want my evidence, my outside evidence. Here's where I want my sourcing, my situation. So anyway, just a thought for those of you who are going to type. This ended up being my simple paragraph because basically I didn't go back and add anything to it. But initially, all of my paragraphs looked like this. They were just real simple. And then once I got everything out, I went back and I said, oh, okay, let me add outside evidence here. All right, now let me add situation there. I hope that makes sense. All right, body paragraph number 2. If you haven't read it yet, hit pause. Go ahead and read it. All right, so for this paragraph, I'm actually only using one document, document 4. But it's a rather complex paragraph because I decided to do both situation and outside evidence. Okay, I forgot to do this in the last slide. I want to remind you guys about the importance of topic sentences. Okay, your topic sentence should be very obvious and very clear. It can literally be like a mini thesis, like you can actually copy and paste part of your thesis if you need to. I know I did that in one of my practice essays. So in this paragraph, I'm arguing that certain countries found an opportunity to profit from this trade in new ways. Okay, so that's my whole argument here. Okay, and keep in mind that every skill that you do in this DBQ, for the most part, like situation and outside evidence, you always need to be bringing it back to your argument. Bring it back to your argument. If you don't tie it back to your argument, you may not earn the point. So for document 4, this was a British person, but he's talking about the Portuguese actions. So I decided to do rhetorical situation here. And I was looking at the who questions. Because remember, for rhetorical situation, there's really 3 different ways that you can do rhetorical situation. You can answer who, for whom, or basically why, for what purpose. Okay, now some teachers, if you've been watching other videos, they're calling this point of view, purpose, or intended audience. It's really the same thing. It's all the same thing. I'm looking at who. Who is Fitch? Well, he's British. And why does that matter? Well, he's talking about the Portuguese. Why is he talking about the Portuguese? Okay, with situation, you're making an inference. I don't know for sure if Fitch is trying to compete with these Portuguese people, but I am making that inference. I am assuming that that's a fair guess, okay? The main purpose of situation is to ask yourself, if I'm a historian, can I trust what Ralph Fitch is saying? Does he know what he's talking about? Well, in this case, he's a merchant, so he's familiar, certainly, with economic activities. And so notice that I have written several lines here. It's like one very complex sentence with a semicolon and then one normal sentence. You're not going to get the point for situation if you're writing one single simple sentence. It's just not going to happen. At the same time, I don't want you guys writing a whole paragraph for situation either. You got to find kind of the balance. And keep in mind for situation, that was our skill that we introduced totally over distance learning. We never got to practice that one in person together. And so if you feel like you can't do it, it's okay to skip it on Thursday. Totally okay to skip it if you don't feel comfortable. All right, and then in purple there, that's part of my outside evidence. I decided to bring in the idea of the Opium Wars, even though that hadn't actually happened yet. Meaning when document 4 was written, the Opium Wars had not happened, but it's something that connects really well to what I'm arguing in this paragraph. And so again, outside evidence is not just like a little bitty reference to the Opium Wars. It's actually, in this case, about 3 well-developed sentences explaining what they were and why this supports my argument. All right, and body paragraph 3, if you haven't read it, go ahead and pause for a second and read through. This one's kind of long. Body paragraph 3 is also it includes one document. And it's document 1 in this case. This was the image. And if you had trouble with the image, nobody, when we talked today during the practice test, said that they had trouble. Hopefully you remember seeing images like this. But what you're looking at in that image is Spaniards who are exploiting the indigenous people. So like if you're looking at the picture, if you go back and you look at that picture, the Spaniards are dressed in like very typical European clothing, and the natives are not. A lot of the natives appear almost naked, and you can see like some of the Spanish are beating them, for example. So I decided to use this document to argue that this was a social impact because of the social hierarchies that developed as a result. And this might sound familiar to you because this is actually one of the first DBQs we worked with way back a long time ago before winter break this year. So we have looked at this before, but I chose different images in different documents. But it's the same argument. Okay, so this was a document that I felt like I could do a historical situation for. Historical situation is really one of my favorite. I think it's easier to get. Of course, you have to know some historical facts in order to use that. But if you look at this sample of historical situation, I think all of you guys know that. We talked about Mita a whole lot. And so I think you could have used this perhaps as historical situation. Some of you also may have used it as outside evidence. Those outside evidence and historical situation are almost interchangeable, but you can't double dip. And what that means is that, like if I were to cover up this purple part of the essay, where I'm discussing the Inca Mita, that can't count for both historical situation and outside evidence. And it can only count for one. So if the reader counts it as situation, that's why I've added another sample in purple of outside evidence. So with historical situation, you just have to give the reader some additional historical information about what was happening at the time of that document, but you don't want to actually discuss the document itself. You've already done that when you paraphrased it. You want to tell the reader something else that they should know or should consider when looking at the document in question. All right, and so that little situation actually set me up nicely for my last example of outside evidence, in which I talked about the actual social hierarchy. So this is probably the first ever sample essay I wrote this way, where I'm actually like really using outside evidence to prove my argument, because my whole argument in this paragraph is about a social hierarchy. And, there wasn't direct evidence of a social hierarchy in that picture. I mean, there was and there wasn't, right? Because obviously the Spaniards are at the top of the social hierarchy in that picture, but it's, that's something you have to know. The document doesn't tell you. So if you read through the purple, I'm talking about the social hierarchies, and we've talked about this in class. And these are all key terms that you should be familiar with, things like peninsulares and creoles. So this outside evidence was pretty well developed because I was really trying to bring home my argument, like wrap it up nicely, if you will. So it's probably a little more developed than it has to be, but I just felt like I needed this for my essay to make sense. Okay, so while your outside evidence does need to be well developed, this is a long example, but it works. All right, and so last but not least, this is probably actually the best conclusion I've written on the 3 practice tests that we did. On one of the practice tests, I don't think I even had a conclusion. And you may not on Thursday. You might run out of time, and that's okay, because if you did a good job in your introduction, you've hopefully already earned the contextualization and the thesis point if you did a good job. Your conclusion, the whole point of the conclusion, that's like your safety net. That's your backup plan. That's your one more chance to try to earn that thesis point or that contextualization point. It's a just in case type thing. So, just watch your time. And if you have time to write one, great. If you don't, hopefully you did a good job in your introduction and you don't really need this anyway. All right, hopefully you found this helpful. It was actually kind of a unique year because normally I only get to do one practice exam with my students, and it has to be on a Saturday. And so, silver lining of this particular situation that we were all in, I got to do 3 practice tests this year, which I've never gotten to do. And hopefully you got to do one of them. If not, maybe you did one on your own time, or maybe you found these videos helpful. My biggest number 1 takeaway for DBQ, and really any other type of writing, not that we're doing the other types this year, is evidence, evidence, evidence. And be specific. If you're not specific and you're not using specific evidence, then it's going to be really hard for you to earn any of the points on the rubric. So as you're reading over your work, remember everything that we've learned this year, and remember all of those don't be so vague activities that we used to do. And if you think you're being specific, try to be even more specific. Assume that the reader knows nothing about history, and so you need to explain it all for them. All right, awesome. You're awesome if you made it this far in the video. I hope this helped. You're going to do awesome on Thursday, and I'm sorry that I keep saying awesome, but it's after midnight and I am really tired. All right, good luck.